Okay, good evening and welcome to the Chemist Club's second annual bonding conference. My name is Cicely Shillingford. I'm the chair of this year's event, co-president of the Chemist Club's NYU chapter, and a PhD candidate at New York University. Before we begin, I would like to recognize the outstanding students who have worked to organize this exciting evening. Can you please all stand and be recognized? Thank you. This committee consists of both graduate and undergraduate students from Cooper Union, Tandon School of Engineering, Manhattan College, and New York University. In true Chemist Club fashion, it's a genuine collaboration between the organization's student chapters. I am thrilled that many of you are attending a Chemist Club event for the first time this evening. The Chemist Club was founded in 1898 as a meeting place for chemists to share ideas and socialize. Today, the Chemist Club is a registered nonprofit with an expansive membership base, including chemists, chemical engineers, chemical industry management, attorneys, financial analysts, academic professionals, and students. We are advocates for higher education in chemistry who are committed to professional development and mitigating transitions from academia to industry. We partner with a comprehensive variety of corporations to host networking events, technical information sessions, company tours, and more to elevate students and catalyze career development. 3 weeks ago, we awarded the first annual Carver Curie Award for Leadership in Achieving Diversity and Inclusion to ExxonMobil. Our latest ventures have been centered on strengthening our professional leadership by broadening the intersections between social consciousness, the chemical industry, and the corporate community in general. Having such different companies represented here tonight is a testament to the ubiquity of this conversation and demonstrates that this issue spans across all industries. Just over a month ago, Chemical and Engineering News reported that although women, the US's largest minority group, complete about as many life science doctorates and medical degrees as men, they make up only 20% of leadership positions and 10% of board seats within drug and biotech companies. Racial, ethnic, and sexual minorities are nearly absent from the upper echelons of corporations altogether. With respect to academia, in 2014, the Open Chemistry Collaborative in Diversity Equity, otherwise known as Oxide, reported that tenured and tenure-track positions within chemistry are occupied by only 20% women, although women receive 40% of chemistry PhDs. Racial and ethnic minorities once again fare even worse. They make up only 4% of these positions, although they comprise 30% of the US population. The Nobel Prizes for chemistry, physics, physiology, and medicine, the most notable accolades in the sciences, have been awarded to 421 men and 17 women. Evidently, underrepresented minorities struggle both to access and remain within the pipeline to high achievement. However, tonight, we are among the leaders that are working to eliminate inequitable policies and actions that have engendered a workforce that does not reflect the diversity of the populace. Your presence here today is so encouraging because it indicates that your companies are willing to invest in the earnest commitment to recruiting and retaining diverse employees. Creating a diverse corporate community is paramount. However, it is just as important to retain this workforce by creating an inclusive company culture. Inclusiveness may involve learning about the unique circumstances and intersectional hardships faced by different minority groups. I congratulate all of you in attendance tonight for your willingness to learn from this distinguished panel. Education that reflects both the true history and true present-day roles of racial, ethnic, gender, and sexual minorities will give the underrepresented the power to shape our own destinies. Education has the power to liberate everyone from both oppression and oppressiveness, from incomprehension and from discomfort. I believe that empathy cultivates empowerment, and empowered people accelerate innovation and constitute dignified, constructive, and lucrative workforces. I can hardly wait to learn from this illustrious panel, so let's get on with it. Our moderator tonight is Dr. Anna Persick, Science Specialist at UNESCO. Anna joined UNESCO in April 2006 as a program specialist serving UNESCO's Man and the Biosphere program within the Division of Ecological and Earth Sciences. Since 2010, she has served as a science specialist at UNESCO at the UNESCO Liaison Office in New York. Her work relates to strengthening the science policy interface in the fields of environmental and sustainability sciences. As part of UNESCO, she has been actively involved in the intergovernmental process of establishing the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Sustainability Development Goals. Anna has been coordinating the UNESCO SCBD Joint Program on the links between biology and cultural diversity since 2010. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Anna Persick.
Hello, everybody. Thank you very much, Cicely, for the introduction and for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here during this second bonding conference. I was very lucky to be also part of the first one, and I see that it's just growing and getting more and more interesting and attracting more and more interesting people on both the panel side and the audience side. So just a very few words on the UNESCO side, on the international United Nations side, when it comes to diversity and inclusion and what it means for our job. So as Cicely said, I work for UNESCO, which is the UN agency that deals with education, science, and culture. And we really, at UNESCO, see diversity and inclusion as a paramount to any successful project that we do, whether in developing country or in a developed country. So when it comes to science, and I work on the science side of UNESCO, our primary objective is to promote international scientific collaboration for the purposes of peace and sustainable development, and also to promote, building scientific capacity around the world. And when we talk about these two big goals that we have, promoting diversity is absolutely imperative. And it is not just so that we have a representation of the world and the way it is, it's because it has been proven that more diverse a company is or a workplace is, more productive that place is. Of course, you get more ideas, more angles, it just gets better, and it doesn't make sense, even just from a productivity point of view, not to be as diverse as one should be or as a workspace should be. So for us, for example, and Cicely talked about the gender diversity, for example, and the underrepresentation of women in general in science. So for us, what we see is that there is a huge problem already at the beginning of schooling. We have 31 million girls that are currently out of school, and they should be in school. So first of all, we really do have to work together to make sure that these girls are back in school. And there are a variety of reasons across different countries, across different cultures, which are the reason for this, for these numbers and for these challenges, but it really is something that needs to be taken care of when we start talking about diversity, inclusion, particularly when it, in the STEM and related science fields. So talking about STEM fields, there is only 35% of girls that worldwide go to STEM careers or to STEM education. So already there is a problem, and we want to try to understand what the actual issues are and how to address that. And then as we move in the schooling process and within the higher education, we've heard some numbers here from Cicely, but in general there is worldwide, there are just 30% of women researchers, which is actually a pretty low number if one thinks that women do represent 50% of the population, the world population. So, and as we move in the echelons of hierarchy in research, the numbers are even lower. And it really is a question for both developed and developing countries, and it is something that needs to be addressed across the world and across all the different fields of science and also other fields. So these are just some of the challenges that we face and some of the issues that we really are trying to deal with at the international level, that is really getting girls to school and then also making sure that people from different cultural backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, educational backgrounds do have access later to vocational or other types of training, higher education, and then to actual work across the world. And it is really interesting for me to be here tonight and to learn about some of the initiatives that these wonderful companies are doing to make sure that diversity is something that is really taken into account into the functioning of their own companies. So I will not go into the explaining who is who, because you do have everything, I think, the bios of the speakers in the little leaflet. And I think the best thing is to just go into the conversation right away. Mm-hmm. And I will start with Tiffany Scott. Yeah. And I wanted to start with a more of a personal question, mm-hmm. and it is with regard to your career trajectory. Mm-hmm. So you started as an engineer, mm-hmm. worked also in information technology, yeah. to then switch to inclusion and diversity.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
How come?
Well, my undergrad degree is in mechanical engineering, and actually my first job after graduating from college was as a rocket scientist. I was a mechanical design engineer in the NASA spacesuit, and I worked for United Technologies, not for NASA, but they had a contract with NASA. It was a great job, and most of my career has been technical, where I started out as the mechanical design engineer, I did sales engineering, I eventually got my master's in business, moved into supply chain management, but being a woman in a male-dominated field was challenging. And so that really built up my passion to help to build a more inclusive culture for everyone. And I did that as a volunteer, in work, inside of work, outside of work. And it wasn't until I started working at BD, and I've been a project manager for about 5 years as an IT project manager, and I started one of our first ERGs for African Americans, and that kind of led me to my current role, because when I started that ERG, this current role as diversity leader of BD didn't even exist. And even when someone suggested it to me, I was like, I don't want to work in HR, I don't want to do that, I'm an engineer. And it wasn't until I thought about it, this has been my life's passion, this is what I've been doing unpaid for so many years, why not get paid to do what's so important to me? So that's what led me from engineering to what I'm doing now. And I would say I feel as though I'm fulfilling my life's purpose.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Ivory.
Yes.
How have you seen diversity and inclusion evolve as a business driver at the company that you work for?
Yes, so I work for BASF Corporation. I've been around with BASF for 14 years now, and that might sound like a long time, especially when I graduated college. I thought I'm going to do 3 years each location, get as much experience as possible. You guys might be thinking that too. But there are opportunities to grow with one company. But BASF has been around for 152 years. And behind Dow is the second largest chemical company in the world. You don't become such a successful company without having the ability to adapt, right? Any organism that wants to survive has to be able to adapt. And so even though BASF has been around, has a very strong commitment to tradition and rigor and process, all the things that make it also successful, we also understand, as all smart companies do, that, as you were saying, profits, innovations, opportunities, solutions are all better when you have diverse perspectives. And when people feel included, when people feel that their voice matters, when people feel that their ideas matter, then the innovations are exponentially better, right? And so BASF doesn't want to be, we survived to be 152 years old. We want to continue on that track and continuing to grow. And frankly, our motto is that we create chemistry for a sustainable future. So it's not even just about the economic principle of diversity and inclusion. It's also, what do we do to support the earth? What do we do to support society? What do we do to support environmental, challenges? So for us, the composition of having a representation of all the different people that we serve, all the different markets that we serve is important. But more importantly, we understand that it's not just a nice thing to do. It's not motherhood and apple pie. It is business strategy to be more innovative. And innovation basically is galvanized when you have different opinions. So that's how I've seen things change from a BASF perspective to become a business driver. And just one example, when we talk about composition and wanting to have that balance, one of the things that I'm really proud about is when we think about hiring people into positions where they're coming into the organization, changing a position, every job has to have a 50% diverse slate as well as a 50% diverse panel. And we want to have a composition minimum of 30% women and minorities. And you might say, well, why 30%? Because research has shown us, and we're a technical company, so we value research, that that's when you feel that you're included. That's when you don't feel that you're lonely and isolated. So that's kind of the challenge, and that's our target, and that's where we're going. I'm really proud of that. And it really shows our commitment. Our CEO has that on his scorecard. He holds his leaders accountable for that. You're not successful unless you're driving that.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. We move to Karen now. So Karen, I understand that you're new in the job, and that actually this job is new to Dow Chemicals. And one of the first things you've done when you started the job is to kind of change the conversation from diversity and inclusion to inclusion and diversity. Could you
Yeah.
explain to us why?
Yeah, absolutely. But first I have to say, you are a rocket scientist, for real?
Yeah.
I mean, this, what's that saying go? Like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist.
Apparently it does.
So impressive. So I've been in my job now for about 8 months. I guess you can say that's still relatively new. And I've been at Dow for 24 years. And so up to a year ago, I was running businesses. That's where I come from. And I'm not in HR. I actually report to the CEO. And so the Office of Inclusion is not in that function. And it isn't that we haven't had people in diversity and inclusion before, but it's never been elevated at this level. And really, the reason it's elevated at this level is because it is absolutely a business imperative. Make no mistake about it. There's a business case, there's a lot of research, we value research just like BASF, and the business case is indisputable. And so we must do this. We absolutely must do this. And so because I come from the business, when I came into the job, I did a lot of external benchmarking, but I also talked to our employees quite a bit. And for me, I had to think about what's going to be different this time. I've been in industry, like I said, for 24 years, so this is probably not my last job. But I'm only interested in doing things that matter, and that matter to the bottom line. Because anything else, quite frankly, is a program or an initiative, and it will be gone unless it matters to the bottom line. So for me, I wanted to change the conversation, because if I think about it from a systems approach, you can have all the diversity in the world, but if the environment rejects it, then it just becomes a hiring program, and you're not getting the return on that investment. So this forced us to really take a transparent and honest self-assessment about our environment. Because if you believe, like I believe, that talent is equally distributed, regardless of your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, your background, etc., then you have to ask the question, why is your organization not more diverse? And the reality is that even though talent is equally distributed, opportunity is not. And so I wanted to lead with inclusion so that when diversity happens, because it is happening, you can just look at the statistics of the United States. This whole concept of minority and majority is going away, whether we like it or not. And so if we're going to continue to get the best talent on the planet, which we must do in order to survive another 100 and some odd years, in order to continue to be the #1 chemical company, then we have to get the best talent, which is going to be a diverse talent. So that's a fact. But inclusion is a choice. It's a choice in every leadership decision you make. It's a choice every day. And when you're not choosing to include, you are choosing to exclude. And so that is the reason why we are focusing on inclusion, not instead of diversity, but in addition to diversity.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I would have like 1,000 follow-up questions. But
But you got to get back to the rocket scientists.
Stick to okay. Andrew, you've been an inclusion and diversity leader for 4 global companies that are at the top of the game in the industry. And what have you seen as the biggest progress or the biggest challenge in these past years?
So I'll focus on the positive, and that's the progress. So I started a minority networking group with my first company, Accenture, and imagine the New York Metro office, so that's Connecticut, New Jersey, New York City. We had 6 African Americans, 3 Hispanics in that office. And New York was one of the biggest offices in the globe. And I'm proud to say when I left 12 years later, we had 3 partners, at least 25 African Americans, and about a dozen Hispanics at different levels. So the biggest change, I think there are two things. One is the leadership agenda. If you look at some of the roles here, you have a chief diversity officer, a chief inclusion officer. That did not exist years ago, right? So it's at the C-level of companies, either as a role or as we've heard on the CEO's agenda. I'm not a chief diversity officer, but every conversation I have is with either my boss, who's a CIO, or her boss, who's a CEO. So that's the level of visibility. But what comes with that is something you also heard, and that is the financial investment and the expectations. I think the number I've heard is companies are spending, excluding salaries, a minimum of $250,000 a year on inclusion and diversity, minimum. Right? And you've already heard that there's an expected payback. It's not just getting talent anymore, it's leading to the actual performance of companies, as much as 2.5 times cash flow. So the payback is there, the results are there. So I'd say those are the two biggest things I've seen, where it is as far as the leadership agenda and the financials that supports it.
Excellent, thank you very much for that. Sumita, a question about your career path and your changes in your career. So we understand that you studied at L'Oreal as a packaging engineer in operations. And so how did you come to the talent portion of the company, working on also diversity issues?
Yeah, so yes, I've been with L'Oreal now a little over 17 years. Started as a packaging engineer and had that opportunity to work up through the organization, taking on responsibility across a number of our brands and divisions. And it was really an interesting opportunity that was presented to me, because I could have continued in the path of engineering and operations and taken on a role in supply chain or plant manager. But in fact, this is where I think even mentorship and sponsorship becomes an important part of the story. I was reporting to a gentleman, and we were talking through my career possibilities, and recruitment is one that he had in mind for me. And of course, like the earlier story, I said to myself, why does he want an engineer in recruitment? What's this all about? But he had a vision where he wanted me to be able to take the learnings that I had had in the different roles and because I knew the organizational culture and be able to spread that more broadly. And so I thought, you know what, I'm going to go for it. Okay, is it a risk in an organization when you're taking on a new kind of a role you don't necessarily have the expertise in, but you have a passion for? You could call that a risk, not really. So I had this amazing opportunity to go into the operations function, which again for us means manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, engineering, and recruit for those roles. And upgrade the quality of talent that was coming into those positions with a very specific focus on diversity, both ethnic and gender diversity, of course. And then after working in that position for a few months, our organization decided to create a centralized talent acquisition model, which I was able to then lead. So in my scope, I oversee all of the functions and all of the levels, and that means the external recruitment for L'Oreal USA. And diversity for us is something that is absolutely a business imperative, because it's certainly reflected. It's about reflecting our consumer and making sure that we have a workforce that reflects our consumer and then can identify the needs of that consumer. So I'm super proud in this role where whether we're recruiting scientists or recruiting creative artists or for recruiting marketers or accounting folks, we're always focused on the diversity component.
Great, thank you very much. And let me also just very briefly say that UNESCO, together with L'Oreal, has a great program to promote women in science, with fellowships that are being given to young women to pursue their scientific careers, and also awards being given to women who have accomplished amazing scientific careers. And every year there are women that are being awarded from the different continents of the world. So again, rather racial and geographic diversity, which is being promoted. And it is one of the programs that we feel are important also because it does provide role models for girls and ethnic minorities to kind of step up and join the science world. So thank you for that too, L'Oreal. Sorry about that, just that was a little parenthesis. I have to love that one. And now we're moving to Microsoft. Alfred. So why are employee resource groups such as Blacks at Microsoft, which apparently is called BAM, such a valuable entity in today's emerging workforce?
Thank you. So it's interesting because when you hear BAM, when we explain to people what BAM was, their first reaction is why BAM? Why use Blacks at Microsoft? And part of it is just to speak it, to say it, to be part of that conversation around who we are and why we need diversity, why we need inclusion in all that we do. Again, my name is Alfred Ojukwu. I've been at Microsoft for about 8 years. I look pretty young, but I've been in the industry for about 20 years, focused on technology. And my passion around diversity and inclusion is really driven around social science, seeing how people interact with each other, seeing how, whether someone's going to speak to someone or not based on, their age, their gender, their ethnicity, whether or not they look interesting to have a conversation with. And I've had a chance to sort of observe that at Microsoft. And when I took on the role as the chair or the president of the BAM organization, it really came to life how important diversity was in the organization, because what we did, and again, BAM's been around since about 1985. Our main headquarters is out in Seattle, so most of our D&I team is out there, and we are sort of the extension of diversity and inclusion. So what we saw was, as we built the BAM program, specifically in the New York metro area, all the other, as you call them, employee resource groups saw what we were doing, and they also became motivated to be part of their own sort of diversity program. So we've had different programs, from having students come on site to basically experience the technology. We've gone to the Microsoft store to do different things. So for us, it's really about action and activity and keeping us engaged in learning and being part of just the whole purpose of what diversity is about. Out of that, what we learn is that there are passions all over the place. When we meet new students, college students, high school students, you start to see that there are things that they don't know. And we start teaching them about how they can build their careers towards STEM, towards STEAM, and eventually become part of that workforce that we know about. And so I think that passion is what drives me. I'm really a technical guy, honestly, true to true, but I actually enjoy diversity and inclusion because it's so important in what we do. I'll just share one other story, and I'll kind of, so we have an event where we reached out to a friend of mine who's the VP in the office, and I said, we'd love you to be one of the main presenters. And he's it's a program for diversity, but he is a white male. And so we were talking, and I'm thinking, okay, this is great. He's going to do this, no problem. And in the middle of our conversation, in the middle of our meeting, he stops and he goes, I got one question. And I'm thinking, okay, how much is it going to cost? Something around that lines. And his response to us was, does anybody really want to hear what I have to say? And so it took me back, because I realized that there's this need for us to re-examine what's going on in our society, right? Because there's so many angles in terms of understanding what inclusion means that we have to kind of take that on as a challenge and figure out how we can be, I can't even talk right now, much more inclusive with everyone, age, gender, interest, focus area, technology, and make sure that everyone's being a part of the solution.
Do you know what, can I say something?
Absolutely.
Do you know what's critical about what you said is that there's this perception that it's a zero-sum game. And so when people hear the word diversity, there are certain parts of the population who believe they're going to lose or they're not included. And I would contend, unless we get everybody in the boat, we will not reach the final destination of true inclusion. And so that's where majority males have to be in the equation. They have to be in the conversation. And so I commend you for doing that, because if we don't get this cross-cultural collaboration and have the real conversation and have the difficult conversations and not seek to agree but seek to understand, then I would contend we're not going to make as much progress as we need to.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, I've said to our senior leadership team, and there's a member sitting in the audience, I said, if you're not uncomfortable as we go through this initiative, then I'm not doing my job. And, I mean, I'm the only minority that's, or I should say, not the only, there are females on the leadership team, but they're, you know, you look at when you walk into the room, one, I don't feel like a minority, so that's a good thing. And I probably should have mentioned, as far as another big change, we also have flipped it. It's inclusion. We're focusing on inclusion because you can see diversity in our company, but the risk is if you don't maintain it through inclusion, you'll fall backwards. So I've pretty much told them, you know, at some point you should feel uncomfortable. So that's a healthy conversation.
Yes, and Tiffany, you also had the experience of co-founding the African Americans at BD, and if you could just talk a little bit about that, just following up on the BAM experience that we heard about earlier.
So I came to BD originally in IT as a project manager. And after being there about 2 years, our CEO had said that BD had this renewed focus in inclusion and diversity. Actually, at that time, we called it diversity and inclusion. And, you know, I kind of waited around to see, well, what's going to happen? I'm in IT, you know, it's okay, but, like, are we going to do anything about this? And so because I had such a strong volunteer experience with my undergrad school where I was president of the Black Alumni Association, I figured, well, why don't I propose to HR that we start an ERG base for African Americans? Because at that time, we only had a women's group, which had been around for five or 6 years, who had, you know, pretty strong success, but we had no ERGs based on ethnicity. So I was a little nervous at the time because I was lower down the organization, and I kind of expected to go to HR and for them to just shoot me down. But surprisingly, they said okay, and they said I would be the co-leader. And the reason I did it is because I didn't really feel like there was much of a community. I didn't feel like there was a community, African-American community at BD. And that's why I brought forth the suggestion. But what I'm happy about is as we began to build the ERG, we were always very inclusive. We wanted to make sure we planned programming that wasn't just for African-American employees. We wanted to make sure even the way we advertised, it was content for everyone and everyone felt comfortable attending. And I'm happy that now at BD we have 8 employee resource groups. And I feel like the success of the African American group helped found the Latino group, our LGBT group, our Asian group, and we're all working together. So I'm happy that even though I was nervous at that time a few years ago to step up and make my voice heard and suggest the ERG because I thought I was going to be shot down, I'm happy I did because I feel like I'm doing my part to help BD just move towards the future and build this inclusive culture across BD.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much for that. We have received a few questions also from the attendees in advance of the panel discussion. So I'm just going to maybe throw them out there to my panelists and start the conversation there. So one of the first questions, it is increasingly common for young professionals to change jobs and careers. How important is talent retention in the current business climate? Are there any initiatives to specifically retain individuals from underrepresented groups? So maybe I could start with Sumita because her title says talent acquisition.
It does, doesn't it?
But then of course the others are
We'll all take notes.
welcome.
Yeah. I get the feeling we're all going to jump in.
Exactly.
We recently read about this idea that millennials will have more than 15 jobs in their career. And when we look at the different kinds of transversal career opportunities that we have in our organization, we like to tell people that you can have them all with us, for example. So, my career is just one example of switching functions and switching roles, and there's others that are up here. But you started by asking about talent retention, how important that is. It's imperative. We've got to be able to create opportunities for people. We've got to be able to create the individualized career paths that give people the kind of career satisfaction they're looking for. And it's not about one size fits all. And it is absolutely about an individual coming forth with their interests, but a company also taking responsibility and being able to share with an employee what their possibilities may be. And so a lot of the work that we do when it comes to career development is what we'd like to say is both an individual path and a bit of a collective adventure, because it's really about both. And to answer your question about, the retention and what we may be doing, I loved hearing about the resource groups and BAM, for example. And we've got a couple of think tanks that we call them at L'Oreal, and one of my favorite ones happens to be the Women of Color think tank, and I'm one of the executive advisors there. And what I think is most impactful is, even if that group has been put together, it's been all about kind of having 3 pillars of impact: one for employees, one for community, and third on the consumer. So when we get together as a group, we're specifically focused on one of those 3 areas in order to be able to make a difference, and for employees to have a voice. So for example, for employees, it may be about career development. Community, it may be about community actions, it may be about activities. And then the consumer, our Women of Color think tank is actually able to input on skincare, new formulations of cosmetics. They're giving their input on advertising, right? So that is how our employees can have a voice and make a difference. And that's what we love, because this really allows us to bring groups together and say, here's, we want your input on the business. And that's one of the think tanks. Of course, we actually have a men's think tank, right? Because in the beauty industry, you can imagine we are a majority women in the workforce. So we need a think tank for the men.
Thank you.
We could do like a men's think tank BAM thing. Coming up with ideas.
Very good. Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll offer up, again, the financials. So, I read a interesting article the other day, and I think the numbers, my HR professionals will probably correct me, the cost of losing a young professional, right, someone who's been with your company 3 years or less, can range from 2 times their compensation, not salary, that's salary, benefits, to up to 5 times. Right? That's what it could cost a company when we lose someone with 1 year to 3 years experience. So in addition to, as you said, maintaining that talent and developing that talent, there is an impact, right? At Ashland, our motto is always solving. So we're looking for smart, innovative people. It's about innovation. We do a lot of things that go into the products of L'Oreal to make us all look and feel great. Well, that excites folks to come into the organization, right? That diversity allows us to make stronger solutions. Well, if that leaves, right, where does that leave us? We're at risk, because our solutions won't stay in pace with what's happening with our customers, right? So it's important that we retain and develop that talent. Both from doing what we need to do to provide those creative and innovative solutions, but it's also, there's a financial price to pay if you don't retain and advance that talent.
Excellent. Very interesting. Yes.
Yeah, just I'll add something to that too. One of the things that we're doing to kind of retain the talent is we developed what we call a mentor-mentee relationship, where, how many people out here have a mentor that they work with on a regular basis? And don't be shy, raise your hand. Mentors are so important to retention. Why? Because they're the people that really re-motivate you when your job lacks luster, right? They tell you, they give you hints, they give you tips, they let you know who to go to, who to come back to. And we developed it so that we have mentors all the way from the lower level positions all the way up to the C-level positions, where if you want to advance your career within the same organization, or even if you want to move somewhere else, they help you think through what options you have. Now, of course, we expect people to be able to do that anyways, but it's nice to have someone that you can reach out to that can give you positive advice that may have gone through those steps already and really help you bolster your next step in terms of staying with the company that you're at. And we do that at Microsoft now, specifically in the BAM program, and we're starting to see that sort of filter out to the other ERGs as well.
Excellent. Very good.
Can I just add another comment
course.
on that? So those of you that don't have a mentor, get one. For those of you that have a mentor, find a sponsor. The sponsor is the one that's going to pull you up the organization, because they're typically influencing or making the decisions around promotions and advancement and rotational opportunities. So it's important to understand the distinction between the two. If you can find a mentor that's a sponsor, that's ideal. Don't just get one. I'm a firm believer of a mentor at work, a mentor outside of work, because different perspectives go a long way.
Excellent.
We actually have a saying that a mentor is a person who turns on the light, a sponsor shines a light on you.
I like that. I just have a bit of a different perspective. And again, I'm not an HR professional, so this is an opinion. I think in the world where we have this whole concept of the gig economy, that I think we have to rethink this whole thing of lifelong employment. Because a lot of the people that I'm talking to, that is not their expectation. When I sit up here and I say I've been at Dow for 24 years, there's some people that say, boy, that's a dinosaur concept. Like, I would like, she's a dinosaur, first of all. She's lived long enough to be somewhere for 24 years. And then don't agree. He gets the hard question. But I haven't quite figured it out. I think something's going to disrupt this whole thing. I mean, if I think about why people have stayed at companies for so long, for sure it's been things like pension that don't exist anymore. I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, there's been some golden handcuffs that have kept people at places. Insurance and there's things that have kept people there that are either going away or they're smaller. That hasn't been the reason I've stayed at Dow. The reason I've stayed at Dow for so long has been because of the people leaders that I've had and the opportunities that they've given me. And so we're doubling down actually on people leaders, because I firmly believe that people lead people. They don't necessarily lead companies. They just don't. But I also think that and I don't have an answer, I'm just throwing it out there. I think there's something to this whole concept of lifelong employment that for some, I think it will still exist, but I think for others that may just not be where we're headed. And so what we have to do is ensure that we get that return on investment and hire that person every day. I tell people, you got to do a stay interview all the time, because regardless of the economy, good people have options, and you should. You should. You should understand your options before you have to exercise them.
Definitely.
So if I can just add on to that, I'm actually responsible for total rewards for BASF, and I cannot agree with you more, because I think that when you think about pension, that was more kind of like the golden handcuffs. It's so good that you can't leave. But pension really doesn't exist anymore. But the way that we look at total rewards from a BASF perspective, it really is the combination of what attracts you to a company. But sometimes you think about, well, I started at a company at this point, maybe I'll retire at that point. Total rewards is mostly influenced by the dash between those two dates. And so when you're at that company, how engaged are you? How included do you feel? What are the different opportunities that are available for you? One of our talent strategies, I was listening to you, is we believe talent is in everyone. So it's not just about people that are going to be the high potential, but if we are not able to basically leverage the connected intelligence and expertise and passion and contributions of the entire organization, we will fail. And so our total rewards don't just look at benefits or the traditional price of admission topics. We differentiate by employee experience. Who's your manager? How is your manager supporting you? Is your manager supporting your development? We also tell employees you should be the driver. No one other than your mom probably cares about your career more than you. So, is that right, Mom? That's the mother of the rocket scientist. But most of the time, your mom's not at work with you, right?
Right,
So, right. So you have to really take this ownership of your career. So there has to be like a partnership. But the total reward for us is the combination of all those things that help you feel fulfilled, that help you identify new solutions and things like this. So I think we're all going to have to up our game, that we can't, it's not just about attraction. And what you also don't want is people retired in place, because the benefits are so great. You want people to feel motivated and mobilized around a challenge and things like that. So that's also our perspective.
Excellent, very good. We have to move on with a few questions, still a few questions from the audience, the pre-prepared questions, but we've answered basically most of them already. So I will just throw this one at you because I think it's kind of interesting. And it talks about, and it's a question with regard to how do you or describe a situation in which you utilize your multicultural skills and perspective to solve a problem. So how do we use this diversity even personally to solve a problem in the company? Is that the hard question for
That's a hard
Andrew?
No,
Just do it. No.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's in, you know, we're not L'Oreal, right? So we're not a consumer-oriented company, but I.
And
you
by
know-
the way, we have a pension.
Oh, that's great.
That was good.
Touche. That was good. And she's at 1-800.
Exactly.
We have a pension.com.
Yeah. No, I just think that I think we do it every day, right? I mean, it's in every decision that I make. I'm quite transparent at work about how I grew up, the fact that yes, obviously there's some things you can see about me, but also I came from a single parent family home. You know, my dad died when I was 12 of a heart attack. My mom worked 2 jobs, because I want people to understand the lens through which I see the world, and therefore the way I make decisions. I mean, I'm probably the best budgeter at the Dow Chemical Company, out of 50,000 people. I mean, I watch my mom make lemonade every day. Every day. And it wasn't until I was an adult that I found out really how much money she made. And she raised 3 girls and she sent them to college. I have no idea how she did that. And so it isn't as much about me being a black woman, but it's about everything that's part of my DNA that I bring to work. And because I work in an environment where I feel comfortable bringing 100% of myself 100% of the time, the company benefits. The company benefits from that. The fact that I've had my experience and you've had yours and other people have had theirs. But the problem is when people don't bring it all. When people are leaving a portion of them at home, and I say to people all the time, I can quote you all the research around the business case, but hear this one. We're paying people 100% of their salary anyway. So imagine if they're only bringing 20% of themselves, 50%, whatever percentage that you want, we are losing. And so I think it's in everything that we do. I'm sure you can talk about some examples where you got the Women of Color think tank, but I mean, just look at some of the commercials that are out there. You gotta say, who was asleep at the wheel and thought that was a good idea? And we're probably being taped, or somebody's gonna tweet me out, so I won't say which ones. But you know which ones they are, and you just gotta say, really? And then go look at the diversity of the boards. Go look at the diversity of the leadership. Go look, because there wasn't even if they are there, their voices are not in the room or being heard.
They're not included.
And they're not included. And so that's okay. I've gone off the rest of it. But
No, very, very good. I have just one last question from this side, and then the audience will ask their questions. And it's about the U.S. immigration policy and how it affects your hiring
she's gonna take the
process.
pension lady's gonna take that one.
Yeah, and whether the emphasis is on acquiring people domestically or also internationally, and how does that work?
Yes, love taking that question. So, as a global company, our focus is to make sure we're looking for global talent. That does mean in the U.S. we're primarily focused on those who can work in the U.S. The benefit of our network is that we're connected to the labs all over the world. And therefore, when we're meeting international students and their top talents and their innovators, we're making sure that they're connected to our colleagues and getting an opportunity for the conversation, for an interview. You know, it's we live in this amazing world where people are coming here, they're being educated, and there's promise and there's opportunity, but we're not always able to deliver on that within the U.S. So it's our responsibility to make the most of our network and our connections around the world to give people that exposure.
Very good. Anybody else?
I've been a comment. I think, you know, what I'm very proud of is for the 4 global companies I've worked with. Every time I start, if I think back, every leader that I've had the advantage of working with always said, Yes, we may be headquarters here in the US, but we're a global company. And so there was always this feeling that, it was always a challenge, right? Is stop thinking US-centric, stop thinking North America-centric. And so this whole, borders thing, you can't have it. You look at the talent that's coming up, they're not all from the US. So, I look at I have two girls, and they're now, in advanced degrees in college. They expect diversity. Right? So when they come into companies for internships, co-ops, they're looking for what they have been led to believe is reality. And so if we're not open and creating that environment, we're not going to get that talent. And so that's my perspective on it.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I think it's time to also ask our audience to ask a few questions. We have a great panel, so take advantage.
If you don't ask, we'll call on you.
Good evening. I'm just going
Hi.
to stand here because I feel awkward with my back to the audience. Okay, cool. So my name is Naomi Cameron. I'm a fourth-year chemical engineer at the City College of New York. You've all done a really good job of explaining the business case for diversity and inclusion as a whole, but this is sort of a new frontier for a lot of companies, and so there's not necessarily a roadmap, in terms of what is true diversity, what is true inclusion. So how do you determine what your overall goal is, and then how do you know when you've gotten there? Because there's really no roadmap for this frontier. Thank you.
So, I'll looking backwards. The roadmap typically starts with some form of resource group. There is always a network team, a BAM team, so it typically starts there. And I'll just go from the beginning to what I think at the end. At the end, I described in my intro. It's part of the business. How you get from a resource group, a networking group, to a business imperative takes time. Now, what I will tell you, I said Accenture took about 9 years. Companies don't have 9 years anymore. So at Ashland, we've pretty much said in the next 3 years. If we're not seeing the results, we have representation, but it then comes back to what are we doing with that diversity that we have and the things that we measure and we think is important. We relaunched our company, rebranded ourselves, and as part of that is the makeup of the company. A company is just what it is. It's a ticker with a name, but it's the people and the talent that makes the company.
So at Dow, we have some very specific objectives that we are measuring. And again, I come from the business, so that's imperative, and they're by 2020. And there are things like, for example, we're measuring our culture through our employee survey. So there's some very specific questions that we're saying that we must improve in. And fortunately, we have an external benchmark, and the reality is, if you are part of any employee survey and you've got this external benchmark that's called CEB, which is one of the standard ones, the reality is that the best are getting better. The best are getting better. So that's one of the things we're measuring. We also measure our ERG participation. Why? Because external research as well as our own internal data says that there is a correlation between strong ERG participation and employee engagement that positively impacts the bottom line. And the best-in-class metric for that is 30%. So we are striving for stronger ERG participation. And not just any participation, we're saying that we want to increase that through allies. So we want people that don't naturally identify with one group to participate. We're driving cross-ERG collaboration as well. And we want everyone from the shop floor to the E-wing to feel free to participate in an ERG. Again, not just for potlucks and, happy hours,
Right.
which are important, but it's because of the money, employee engagement, as well as positively impacting the bottom line. We're also looking at our diversity supplier spend. How much are we spending with certified diverse suppliers, but also how much are we spending with diverse suppliers around the world? Dow is a global company, so in the words of our CEO, in this space, we don't want to just catch up, we want to get ahead. So we're looking at supplier diversity from a global perspective, Of course, we are also looking at diversity across multiple dimensions of diversity. Yes, we are looking at women in leadership for sure. Yes, we are looking at U.S. minorities, but I'll tell you, for example, in one of our organizations that's majority female, we are saying that you should have more males in that organization because that is a gap. It isn't about having all women or more women. It's actually about having diversity. That's where you get the best decision making. That's where you get the best business outcomes. So we have specific things that we are saying, you know, again, we can all feel good about this, but unless we make visible and meaningful progress, then it's just been another program or an initiative. And that's by 2020. That's not 2025, that's not 2030, that's not, you know, when I'm gone and retired. 2020, we'll know if we're making progress. I think you said the same thing.
Yep.
Excellent. Yes, there is a question over there.
Can I say one more thing before I get to the?
Yes, please.
Just back to the ERGs, because I think this is also important. I mean, we, like I know a lot of other companies, have what I would call the traditional ones. Women, we have an African American network, we have what we call Disabilities Employee Network, et cetera. We're also actually looking at adding a couple of more ERGs so that everyone in our organization can see themselves. Everyone can see themselves. One of the spaces I'm really passionate about, probably because I'm reaching that age, are mature workers. The reality is that, and that's not the term I want to use because I don't want to be called mature probably. I don't want to be called
Wise.
old, I don't want to be called 50 and over, I don't want to be called any of that, so I got to think of a cool name. Because I am a grandmother, so that's, you know, again, I don't want to be called a grandmother either, but.
Exactly.
But the reality is that there's a lot of wisdom, expertise, and experience in those workers. And if they're, what did you use? You said the word checked out or retired at work?
Retired in
on the
place.
job.
Right.
Retired in place.
Yeah.
Then we are not extracting the full value. And there's a lot of workers that reach that level and think that the narrative is only around the millennials. I'm no longer valued, I'm no longer developed, and therefore I'm not fully contributing. And so we are actually looking at ERG so that everyone in our organization can see themselves somewhere, and it's not just those individual silos or those traditional ones that are around the underrepresented groups.
So one of the things that I've heard from you guys is how your roles were new to the organizations that you're in. So I was interested in some of the key challenges that you faced, either when your roles were in the process of being created or, like, say, in the first 6 months of your new roles. I mean, what were the main challenges internally as well as externally?
I can start with that one. So I've been in my role about 10 months now. And one thing I felt, but I discovered more so last week, because I've been trying to plan more open sessions where I can share the overall inclusion and diversity strategy with all associates, all employees, so they can just come and learn more. And this one woman commented last week that she was so surprised that our diversity strategy had anything to do with business. She was hearing more of the feel good, that we're doing it because it's the right thing to do, that we're being benevolent, that our employee resource groups were extracurricular, they were fun. And the challenge is communicating the business value, because, I think once we explain it, people will understand there's a business value, but I just think the way we've been communicating it, it's been mostly from HR, it hasn't been from our business leaders, so people just think it's fun. Diversity's fun. If you have time to do it, fine. If not, oh well, it's not a big deal. And that's been the challenge, making sure that people understand that this is a business strategy. We want to be more inclusive, diverse, so we can be more competitive in the global marketplace. That's why we're doing it. So that's been one of my key challenges over these last several months.
And maybe just from the international perspective again, and it touches upon some of the things that was said here on the panel. For example, for us, the biggest challenge is what diversity is and what it means and how diverse it is in different parts of the world. And for example, the age diversity is becoming something increasingly important in places like Japan or Europe or even the US, because you have more and more people that are over 60, over 65, which are still capable of doing their job. And it's a very different picture from what it was 50 or 60 or 100 years ago. At the same time, in Africa, you have a booming young population, so diversity there means something very different. It means getting these young people to get their education and to get their jobs. So while we also strive to create some kind of international standards around what diversity is and how it should be reflected in different policies, it is true that it's like a work in progress, and it evolves as the population evolves and as, you know, social dynamic, cultural, and other circumstances evolve around the world.
Another way to think about it is if we remember the event that happened in Florida just recently that sort of spurred all the students to become much more of a voice, you know, in society. Sometimes it takes, you know, activities like that to sort of, you know, re-energize that voice that nobody's ever listening to. In my role as the lead in the Blacks and Minority, one of the things I realized is people are watching what you're doing. They're watching to see if you're going to drive a new solution. Are you going to lead a new program that you want to develop? And they're also waiting for you to give them something to do, right? So part of my intention is to create new leaders, right? I have a lot of great ideas that I can share with the members, but if they're not executing, then I don't feel like I'm really pushing that agenda. So what I try to do is spur them to be part of that organic idea development so that they feel like they're, you know, empowered to make a difference at Microsoft. And again, with us, we have a global company. So even I was speaking to a young lady that lives in Brazil, and, you know, she's like, oh, I want to go to the conference. I'm like, why don't you go? She goes, well, I didn't know about it. And she goes, well, I said, maybe you can be a panelist. And she realized that, I realized, not she, that there was a lot of diversity in Brazil, that they deal with a whole different level of diversity that we don't see here. So that action really was a way of motivating somebody else to tell their story. We all have stories to tell. So I always drive the idea that in your role, your job is to be focused on making a difference so that people can actually be, you know, active in making a difference as well.
I think for me, to answer your question specifically, today at Ashland and in my past, it's remembering that this isn't my full-time job. So there is an expectation as an IT leader that I am an IT leader. Right? When I was in the business, there was an expectation that I delivered my business results. Right? So I can't compromise one for the other. I still bring the same passion, I still bring the same energy, but there is an expectation that, and it's happened in the past where, you know, someone said, hey, you're spending way too much time on that diversity stuff.
Me too.
And so it will happen. It's a reality, right? When it's not your full-time job. And so I would say that's a challenge.
So for me personally, I am not the Chief Diversity Officer. I partner very closely with our Chief Diversity Officer. And so I've seen also some of the growth, the advantages and the positive things that we've experienced, but I've also witnessed and been a part of what can be some of the challenges associated with that. And so first of all, I think one of the key challenges is a bias about the benevolence of diversity, right? And about that this is really a nice thing to do. And for organizations, listening to what you've been saying around this business imperative is sometimes you just have to also speak the language of that business and help them understand from their perspective why this is important. Why this is not something that you shouldn't do, but something you can't afford not to do, right? And so I think part of it is data. If I think about, and I think I might be one of the only people in HR on this table, and I just want to tell you guys, change your opinion about HR. We're really great people. But I'm feeling like so.
No.
I feel like I need to like speak up for HR here. But I think that part of it is.
Included.
I want to feel. No, but I think part of it is, you know, I think whether it's human resources, whether it's IT, whether it's EH&S, whether it's procurement, there's a business case that's required for any business decision. Diversity is a fact, right? And I think that when you talk about facts and you kind of get away from the story and the perception and the bias, and you help people understand what's in it for them, is change management 101. How do you get a person to get passionate around something? You have to not just speak to their head, but you also have to speak to their heart. And so for me, it's, you know, diversity is a fact. You have to get the data. You have to show them that there's a business value to it. You have to have some stamina. You just like any other thing that you're trying to get approved, whether it's building a new plant or going into a different market, there has to be some data that needs to be able to support that. But I think also diversity and inclusion is a little bit art and science. So the inclusive piece, in my opinion, is where you talk to them about every human has felt powerless, every human has felt isolated, every human has felt that they want to be a part of something. Where as leaders, you have the opportunity to remove that for the people on your team, and when you remove that, you actually open up possibility for them. What leader doesn't want to have people that feel invited, that feel motivated, right? So I think there are some data and some facts and some figures that we cannot ignore. Like you said, the best are getting better. We can't ignore it, and if you want to be in this game, you have to be committed to it. But on the other hand, you know, I kind of say diversity is like being invited to a party. Inclusion is like being asked to dance. There's a difference, right? And so how do we help people articulate that and translate that into business and customer solutions and things like that? And so for me, I think what I've observed and what I've experienced is that sometimes you will face bias and sometimes you will, you know, face hills. Every business unit does. It's not different. There is a solution, there is a path that you can get to it.
I'd like to add something from this really important point about that business case. So our CEO had boldly declared that we were going to achieve 1 billion new consumers by the year 2020. And the US commitment to that billion was between 70 and 100 million new consumers. So the reason for being in my role, my team's role, and what we do is all about who are we going to bring into the organization that can help us to identify and find those new consumers. So if we just keep hiring the same, what will we get? Right? And what's the definition of crazy? Doing the same thing and expecting different results, right? So a lot of what we do has really been about, okay, looking at a diversity of backgrounds and industries, but who's going to come in with a new perspective on a consumer that we haven't even thought about? Who's got that insight? Who's got that technology? Who's got that formulation for that consumer segment we haven't targeted yet?
Very good.
He won't stop. I love it.
Okay, we will leave you to talk later.
Yes.
Also, no problem. I think we do have time for one more question, right? So please.
Hello, my name is Antari Stallings. I'm the Research and Program Manager for Oxide. My question for you guys is, with respect to diversity inside the organization, it's easy to hold people accountable for those numbers. But what are your strategies for holding the organization accountable for inclusion? How do you make that happen? How do you make it actionable?
I would say it's not easy. I mean, it's not always easy to hold people accountable for the numbers. You know, what I would say that you can have them, but they're lagging indicators. And for me, leading indicators is just what you're talking about, which are the inclusive behaviors. And so really being able to articulate in an organization what those inclusive behaviors look like and really holding people accountable to those inclusive behaviors at every level of the organization, because what you will hear people say is, well, we hold people accountable at the lower levels, but at the higher levels, there's a discrepancy. And, you know, my grandmother would say the streets are watching, right? And so the moment you have that discrepancy or that exception, you've lost all credibility. And so it's absolutely critical that you can identify and articulate what those inclusive behaviors are. Every company holds you accountable at the end of the year for the what and the how. Every company does. And so inclusive behaviors has to be baked into the expectation and to whatever performance system that you have. The competencies, the values, it has to be integrated into that. And can I just go back to one more thing? Because you want to say one more question. I want to go back to his question, because I was thinking about what has been the biggest challenge. If you take a look at this panel and almost every other panel that I've been on, and I'm not exaggerating, I've probably been on 20 since I've been in this job. They all look the same. I report to the CEO, so I don't have a lot of barriers. You know, I came from the business, so I knew all the business leaders. I could have the conversation. I could articulate it in business concepts. But the biggest issue for me two things. A, I'm impatient just by design. That's how I was born, impatient. But the second thing is we have to make this everybody's issue. Every time I go to a conference, every time I go somewhere, it's generally, I won't say always, people of color. People of color. And if there are Caucasian people, they're generally women. We have to make this everybody's issue. Everybody's opportunity. Everyone has to be an advocate. Because what happens is people are waiting for the woman of color to tell them how to fix it. And that's not sustainable. And so our biggest challenge is how do we get diversity in the boat talking about the issue so that we can solve it together. So, sorry, I had a delayed reaction to that. I was trying to think about how to articulate that.
Very good. Thank you very much
Actually,
for
I
that.
have one response also. I think that in addition to performance metrics, I think the organization has to behave differently, right? So if you value inclusivity and you want to have people be more inclusive, then you should select more inclusive people. So when you are promoting managers, when you're promoting individual contributors, you're promoting experts, when you're recognizing certain behaviors, the streets are watching, right? So I think it's looking across what people see in your culture as proof points. How are you standing up to that? So I think also we all come to our different perspectives through our life experience. So we can't also assume that everybody has the same perspective that we have when we set a target. So you also have to build that perspective in the organization. So there's an investment in making sure people understand what does inclusion mean for us? What does it look like? What does it not look like? How do we handle behavior that's not inclusive? How do we reward behavior that is inclusive? And that's kind of how culture, the way that things are done around here, is how you start to get a more inclusive type of an environment. But it's not something that's the flip of a switch. It takes time and it takes investment. And I think if we only measure diversity and inclusion by the shareholders meeting and by then it's a long-term type of a strategy. And you have to have also that stamina to kind of look at that from a long-term. This is a long-term business. This.
Yeah, I agree with Ivory. I think for us, yes, we built it into our performance management system. I think the biggest learning for me, we flipped it and we said, well, it's one thing to measure and tell people, but if you don't teach and train, right? So literally our entire employee engagement program is around inclusion at the workplace. And we're making a significant investment in that this year because it's not fair for me to ask, my counterparts to I'm going to measure you on inclusion and I'm going to be watching you if I don't teach them right, how to acknowledge where they may have themselves. You'll hear the term unconscious bias. What are some of the things that if you've been in the workforce for over 20 years and you've just gotten a certain way of working and managing and judging talent and assessing performance, there are certain biases that you bring to that. And so you need to be able to create a safe, inclusive environment where someone can say, geez, I never realized that before. So it's both, yes, having the measurements and the systems in place, but you have to be prepared to reteach, recoach, and develop those folks to get those behaviors.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. We really had a wonderful panel. I thank all the panelists for all their answers.